Oh, it's so good. All right. Naomi Wright, where you at? Come on up here. All the way from Denver, Colorado. So we have communicated a lot, you and Michael mostly, right?
It's so good to meet you in person.
Oh, that's
We
right.
haven't done that
That
yet.
is right.
So
We
good to
have
meet you.
not. I have met your the one that came earlier.
Therese.
Therese,
Yes.
yeah, back there. But Naomi, so good to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
And she's been doing ministry in this area, right? That's why you weren't able to be here. And so, my kind of person, always ministry minded. Wherever you go, always doing ministry. So, yeah.
Well, thank you for letting me take over your office the past couple of days to do that. So, very generous of him. As many have, I know, who are getting up here, we've been thinking about this idea of stepping out of the boat. And it was about a year ago now that I heard a pastor give a sermon about Peter stepping out of the boat. And he pointed out something that I hadn't noticed before, which is always a good pastor, right? Bring your attention to new things. And he spoke about how in Scripture, and I checked even in a bunch of different translations, and it says it in every single one, that when Peter stepped out of the boat, he started to sink when he took his eyes off Jesus. And this was highlighted because we don't step into water and start to sink, right? Like we just sink. But when he stepped out of the boat in faith and he kept his eyes on Jesus, he's walking on water, and then when he took his eyes off, he started to sink. That gave him enough time to cry out to the Lord for help, and it says the Lord immediately put his hand out to him. And I think that is an incredible visual of what my life has been, of me starting to sink over and over and over again and crying out to the Lord for help and him immediately showing up in one way or another to keep me going. I grew up in a group that I was told was Christian. I was raised being told that I was Christian. I was the true Israel. I was the one. So our group was that small remnant. We were the ones who are going to be saved. I was raised that my parents and we would walk into the new heavens and the new earth together. I never feared death. I never feared the loss of anyone that I loved. I was in a group that embraced polygamy. My dad had many wives. I have a lot of siblings. But I was raised in Western New York going to public school. So I had to hide all of that. So I went to school. My mom worked for the school. She was very well known in the school. And I had to act like my siblings were cousins and our other moms were aunts. And I looked very different because we embraced all the holiness standards, if that sounds similar to some. So I had the long skirts, of course, and the uncut hair, and did not have any of these holes in my face that I do now and such. So, yes, I was told that would mean I didn't want to hear the word of the Lord. And that was, I definitely did, and I still do want to hear the word of the Lord. So I took that very seriously. But all of that, going through public school, living this very duplicitous life, hiding all that I had been taught, hiding that my dad was the prophet, that he had the truth, that he was who I was to listen to, that he was the one who was going to be likened to John the Baptist, heralding Jesus' return. Knowing all of these things and yet not being able to share them because my family wouldn't be safe. Polygamy is illegal. Some of my siblings were born at home and were unregistered. They were undocumented, not in an illegal alien way. Like, they didn't have social security cards. They didn't have birth certificates kind of way. And so I had to keep all of that quiet, which was really hard because there were people that I was meeting that I really loved and seemed to be really good people. But I couldn't tell them the truth without risking, jeopardizing the safety of my own family. It was also really confusing in a lot of ways because I was being told that God was one thing. He had a certain character, but I was experiencing something different. I don't know if anyone else has had that experience, but it's really confusing. So I was told certain things about Jesus, and I was told certain things about God the Father, and I was told some different things about that. Not everyone is, but there were some distinctions there in personality, I'll say. And yet I also had some of my own experiences, again, that were in conflict. So I grew up in a really abusive household. All of the abuses, all of them happened in my household. And I was told that my dad's anger was righteous, that he was like Old Testament prophets, like this was how he was supposed to be. So if I got thrown into a wall, I was to look past that. Some of his wives were 17 when he took them, and he was in his 60s. So behaviors like that, and I wasn't exempt from those behaviors either. When I was 8, there was someone who was in his 40s, and I was supposedly going to end up maybe being his wife. That was a possibility. So these are the kinds of things that were going on in this group. And again, I was told, though, that my dad was God's prophet. So then who is God? Is God scary? Is he mean? Is he wrathful? He's just? Okay, what does that mean? So I was really confused. I was really afraid of the Lord. I wanted to obey him, but not because I knew that he loved me or because I loved him, but strictly because I was terrified. Because if he was bigger than my dad, my dad was very scary. He was a very scary man. So I started rebelling in ways as a teenager. Again, I was in public school. I remember I was 14, and I bought my first pair of pants, and I changed in the bathroom. I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. I told you already that my mom worked for the school, right? Like, that was not well thought out. So I started doing little things like that, which aren't necessarily little. I'm saying little now because of my perspective on what the big things are, but it was huge at that. This was huge. And I didn't actually feel rebellious. I wasn't wanting to be rebellious. It wasn't like I didn't have this rebellious spirit of like, oh, I just want to go cause trouble. I didn't really know what to do, and I didn't really know what was okay and what wasn't okay, and it seemed like some of these things were okay. There were a lot of people who were saying that they were Christian and they celebrated Christmas. They celebrated Easter. They celebrated birthdays. We only celebrated Thanksgiving. It's just because my dad loved a really good meal. Other than that, we didn't celebrate anything. And so I was really trying to figure this out. It's like, who is God? Is this okay? Is this not okay? Because I would have these moments too. I have this one really strong memory that happened multiple times where when my dad was in town, because I'm very close to where the rest of the group was, like way too close. Like maybe you could move this next time. So all like Mansfield, Lexington, Bellevue, Ashland, like all of that area was like the hub, even though I was in Western New York. So a lot of my dad's family was in this area, so he would travel back and forth, which was a good thing for me because he wasn't there all the time, because again, he was really abusive and scary. So when he would be home though, and he would be in his room and I'd have to go knock on his door for supper. Supper was 5 o'clock. It's 5 o'clock. I don't mind a punctual meal, that's fine. But you don't want to be late. You do not want to be late. So I would have to go knock on his door after setting the table and let him know that it was time for supper. And that was a really scary thing to do because that then meant he was out of his room and we didn't know what was going to happen for the rest of the evening. And I remember though, looking out of my bedroom window, and we had this gorgeous maple tree in the backyard and these very overgrown lilac bushes, as I think lilac bushes should be, because why trim those? They're just stunning and they smell great. So I remember looking outside though, and the window was open, and I could smell and I could feel the breeze, and I saw the sun starting to set behind that gorgeous maple tree. And I felt this peace that didn't make sense. And I knew that I was going to be okay. I had this sense that I'm going to be okay. And I knew that that had to have been the Lord. And I have a memory then older, when I was maybe 15-ish, where I'd be brought to Ohio away from my mom. We were taught to be very unattached. Her kindness to us was considered her spoiling us. I really wasn't spoiled, I promise. But she did love me a lot, and I'm grateful for it. So I remember though being out here, I was about 15, and I remember listening to this song it's called Candle in the Water. I don't know if that will sound familiar to anyone. It's technically from Pete's Dragon. But yeah, and I felt as if the Lord was saying that to me, of I'm going to be your candle in the water. Like, I'm still here, I'm reaching out for you. Keep reaching out for me. You're gonna be okay. Fast forward to being 21, my dad, who was never supposed to be able to die, he died. It was shocking. We had to quickly pivot as to what on earth do we do with that? That wasn't supposed to be able to happen. It's happened. We waited 3 days. We waited 7 days. Like, is he coming back? Is he going to resurrect? These beliefs run deep, right? Yeah. We really hold on to them. 3.5 years later, then, my mom passes away. So now I'm 25, not now, 25 at the time, and oldest generation in my family. I was like, wow, I don't have that safety net anymore that I had. Like, I don't get to call the prophet and say, like, is it okay to do this or that? Or, hey, I made this mistake, could you help out? It was very much, okay, I'm on my own. And seeing them pass was incredibly painful, not only because of that complication of the beliefs of, okay, my whole worldview is, what do I do with it? Because if it was true, this shouldn't have been able to happen. So how do I hold up this house of cards now? It was exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting because the threads were getting tugged, and they were getting tugged in such irreversible ways. But it was also really difficult, the actual decline, because we didn't believe in medical care. And so no one had medical support. So they were painful deaths without any actual support from a team. And that mirrored my childhood. I had an accident once and was unconscious for 18 hours and no help was called. Once I was taken to the hospital with a fever of 106 from an infection. I'm so glad they did that, because I probably would not have been here today. So after they both passed away, I was in a place of just complete confusion, lost, and absolutely heartbroken. My mom had been my world. And so losing her was a huge deal in my life. And she was only 64. Depending on how old you are, that's really young now. It's getting younger as I get older. I'm like, 64, right? Baby. So I packed up what I could fit in my little Prius that I had at the time, and I ended up in Colorado. Had a couple of pit stops along the way, but landed in Colorado. And I knew that I wasn't going to be able to run away from all the stuff that was inside. I was informed enough to know that wouldn't work. But I did need a change of scenery. I needed to feel like I could breathe. I needed some fresh air because I didn't want to be alive anymore, as I know some of you have mentioned. Yeah. I didn't have anything to be alive for. Everything I believed was gone. All of it was untrue. I had lived all of that and it was untrue, and there were permanent consequences of the false beliefs because they were dead. And maybe my mom could have still been here now had she gotten help. So I land in Colorado, and if nothing else was going to take me out, that could have done it, because I was on my own and I was starting to feel all this stuff that I hadn't since I was a little girl. I survived being a little girl by dissociating. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that, but basically I can see myself in all of my memories. I was floating in the corner of the room, and that's something that our brains do, especially as kiddos, because it's a great option for us as kiddos because we can't actually leave. So it's a way that we help to keep ourselves safe. It's a really good thing that the Lord designed us to be able to do that. But I found I was doing it a lot when I didn't need to, and so I needed some support for that. I also needed some support because I become bulimic. And I never really liked drinking a lot, but it was an option. So then I was drinking too much for a while there. Just was not taking care of myself. I had not been told that I had value and worth. I certainly had not been treated as such. And I had not been told that my body was actually mine. And so there were a lot of things that I needed to learn through that season. I had this same kind of duplicitous situation then, though, y'all, where, like I did with the tree, where I would go for walks in the mountains, and while I was feeling so much anxiety and so much grief, at the same time, I had this joy, this like uplifting. And I remember telling friends, I know that God is telling me that if I do this really hard stuff, that it's not going to be this way forever. And I just knew that. I felt that same kind of sense of peace, again, alongside the anxiety. It's not like I was just peaceful. I wasn't. I was a mess. But there was like this presence of this is going to be okay. But I need to stop stuffing it, and I need to stop trying to hold up the house of cards. I'm going to have to let it fall down. That was really hard to do. It's hard in every situation. There are nuances, I think, to all of our stories. A nuance for mine was that it was my dad. That's hard to swallow in a different way, I think. Not necessarily harder, but again, there's like a nuance to it. I ended up walking to a church for the first time, praying that the Lord would not smite me because we met in homes. And so walking into an actual church building, I was told was of the devil, and to not do that. And I remember standing outside the church and truly asking the Lord, I am trying to find you, and that is genuine. And so if you are not here, please redirect me because you're who I'm looking for. I'm not looking for anything else. Ended up meeting my best friend there. She's like a little sister, and my husband, we've been married for almost 12 years. It'll be 12 years this year. We have a little boy who is such a gift. It's incredible. So all of these times of stepping out, starting to stink, stepping out, starting to sink, crying out to him, if you're real, I know you're real. Some of us have different questions. I talk to a lot of people who are wondering if he is real. I was more of, I'm wondering who you are. Like, are you actually good? Are you actually faithful? Like, who are you? And then as I was trying to figure things out, I got tripped up in all kinds of other stuff along the way. I'm trying to figure out, I ended up going into like more of a new age direction for a little while because I'm like, well, I still need to know what my dad has to say. And so that got weird. Don't do that. Don't go that way. That got weird real quick. Again, ultimately land in an Orthodox Christian church. And I reached this point where I thought it's like, okay, I'm good. Like I've done a lot of the hard things. It's not that I'm never like having stuff come up or anything, but okay, I've kind of, the Lord has helped me build this life, this solid sense of community and, work that I love. And then 2020 happens, and the work that I loved that I was doing stopped because I was working in the event industry in Colorado, so that shut down. I'm like, okay, well, I thought that was it. Guess that's not it, at least for now. And I'd been a social worker. I'd worked in hospice and things like that. You could probably see how that happened, how that came to be. Help people die well and with dignity in a way I wasn't able to do for my own. And this was the next big step out of the boat moment for me. I felt like the Lord was saying to share what he's done for me. And I had not done that. People did not know my story. And people who I had known for a long time didn't really know how Christian I am either. I just had kept faith really quiet overall. And again, I didn't share about my past. And so when I felt like the Lord was saying this to me, I knew in our relationship at that point, it truly was going to be an act of obedience. And was I going to choose to do it or not? And I felt this, wow, Lord, I know too much at this point to not. You've done so much. The least I can do for you is to share what you've done for me. And so I ran with that in a direction that turned into a nonprofit organization called Be Emboldened, where we come alongside others from all backgrounds who have had stories, some like mine, some like mainstream things that happen that can wind up in the news. So all kinds of variations. People who have come from Amish communities, Mennonite communities, 2x2s, The Message, UPCI, New Apostolic Reformation. I mean, just a lot. And it has been such a gift to be able to do this, to be able to come alongside other people and help them disentangle and not tell them all the answers, but help equip people like I was equipped to be able to look at scripture and read it and know, and to be able to compare. Like I knew when I was hearing the Lord say, tell them what I've done for you, I knew that was biblical. I heard some things at times that weren't biblical. Growing up, I'd hear things and think, oh gosh. And that's part of how I came out, was I actually compared to scripture and I saw, no, this doesn't match. God's not going to contradict his word, and it doesn't match. So what do I do with that? So we went, and my husband, sitting over there, I made a story video, and I went back to my hometown. I hadn't been there in a very long time. And I recorded this video, and that started being emboldened. It started what I've been doing now for 5 years, and prayerfully will be doing for a very long time. And I think my hope through all of this, through all that I've lived and all that I now get to share, is that people will hear through my story that we are going to start to sink a lot. But when we cry out, he is faithful, and he is good, and he is merciful, and he is just. And I'm glad I'm not the one who has to figure that out. I'm glad he does it. So my role is to keep my eyes on him. And so with that, if you don't mind, I'd love to, John, we're going to play that little 8-minute video, and I'll leave you with that. Growing up, I felt caged. I was oftentimes scared. I grew up living a lot of secrets and needing to maintain those in order to keep my family safe. And so I never felt a sense of being free to be me, whomever that was. There's so many different components to my story. The direct cult experience, the indirect coping mechanisms of bulimia and drinking, and the deaths, losing parents young, a young divorce. I define a cult as an unhealthy group with a religious focus that has an authoritative leader. I was keeping my family safe from mainstream public finding out about our lifestyle and our belief system. I was told that some of it was illegal, and also people generally would not understand. I lied about everything. I lied about why we didn't celebrate holidays. I lied about the way I was dressed, the long skirts, the long hair, things like that. My siblings, which was the biggest one, I said that I had one and then a bunch of cousins, but our group was polygamous and I had 16 siblings in total. I lied about my dad traveling for his job when really he was back and forth between different families. Lying all the time made me feel scared and like I just constantly had to be on guard to cover things. I could never just be at peace and at rest. I learned to be really quiet. I learned to be quiet within my home to draw less attention. I was terrified. I was terrified of my dad. I was terrified of his abuse, his abusive nature. I was terrified of not knowing what would set him off and when he would get set off. I was terrified of not having the time with my mom because my dad did not care for us being close to her. He'd say we were spoiled. I also was terrified of not having any sort of protection while he was there. I remember driving on the school bus past the house and seeing that his car was in the driveway, meaning he had come home for a while and I didn't know for how long. Truth in my upbringing was whatever my parents said it was. My dad was similar to a John the Baptist who was heralding Jesus' third and final coming. I believed that Jesus had come a second time already, and the world had missed it to a degree. And because of that and the overlap that would occur, I was raised that my parents and their associated generation in this group could not and would not die. Those were the most significant spiritual beliefs. I absolutely believed those things. I was raised in them since I was born. I never knew anything different. I loved my parents and I trusted them even though I was afraid of him. My dad passed away when I was 21 and he was supposed to be immortal. He was not supposed to die, so that was shocking. We rationalized that based on some teachings that he had, so I continued to believe in this faith. But then my mom passed away when I was 25 and she was my world. After my parents died, I finished up my master's degree and then I packed up what fit into my Prius and I left the state and found myself in Colorado. I had to have some space between there and myself. I couldn't see the places that I had been seeing for a while. In retrospect, I have a different outlook, but I knew at that time if I was going to heal and come away from that, I had to get away. Looking back, I would think in my story that my upbringing would be the hardest part, but the transition was actually the hardest part. I was so devastated inside and had so many years of hiding and bottling things up and not feeling things that I couldn't answer the question, how do you feel? I could only say what I thought. As I got older and moved on from that a bit, and I did share, no one knew what to do with that information. Truth during this period of my life was whatever I felt. It was my emotion. I sought out Reiki and mediums and those sorts of more New Age practices to try to connect with them and get guidance. Trusting myself has come a long way. That was one of the biggest problems, potentially the core issue in the transition that I made out of the cult. I was so used to being told and just agreeing and going along with it, whether I believed it or not. I didn't even think to consider if I believed it or not. I just had to do it. And so when I transitioned out, I had to learn how to trust myself and have that confidence in my research and in the investigating that I was doing. And now I don't have to be afraid because I can trust myself. These groups are common. I am running into and meeting way too many people who have overlaps in their stories. And it absolutely wrecks me that so many people are going through this and don't necessarily have a voice, especially coming out of their secrecy, to reach out and find the help and support that they need. For someone who is in this situation and they're seeking healing, they're seeking what truth is, I would encourage them not to give up, because I'm the one who has made it to the other side and it's beautiful over here and it's so worth it. And it gets way worse for a little while, but then it gets way better, and it's genuinely better all the way through, all the way to my core. I'm not having to fake it and cover up anymore. I genuinely have a good life. My life right now is so good. I have a good life now. I miss my parents. I miss my mom. I wish she were here to play cars with her grandson. She would love him so much. But I'm also relieved that they're gone, because I've gotten a new life because of that. And I get to give my son a different life because of that. There's so many different parts to my story. There's so many different experiences that I've had. And for anyone who resonates with even a piece of that, I want them to know that there's hope, that their life can be different, that they can heal.
Wow. So, want to say, I know
it was telling me, climb out of the boat, take a walk on the way. you'll never go till you step out on faith. Don't fear the wind or the rain. Jesus called you, now go. Others might think you're insane. Just climb out of the boat.